Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. It had been one of those Sundays where the house felt both too quiet and too alive at the same time. My husband, Daniel, had left early in the morning for a business trip, the echo of his rushed footsteps fading before I'd even finished my coffee. The house, for once, was mine. I spent the day lazily reading on the couch, sipping tea and wandering from room to room. At some point, I'd taken my laundry out of the dryer and folded it in the living room while a movie played in the background. I didn't notice when a small, pale piece of lace slipped off the pile and fell between the couch cushions. Hours later, there was a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I found Ryan standing there, Daniel's oldest friend, the one who had helped him move us into this very house. Tall, confident, and with that faintly mischievous glint in his eye, he was the kind of man who never seemed to belong entirely to the room he was in. "Forgot to drop this off yesterday," he said, holding up a small boxem tool my husband had lent him. I invited him in without thinking. We sat in the living room, catching up. It was easy with him. He knew my husband's quirks. He knew our history. And yet, there was an unspoken current between us that had nothing to do with Daniel. I'd all thought at some point he shifted in his seat, his gaze drifting to the couch cushion beside him. His brow lifted ever so slightly, and when I followed his eyes, my heart skipped. There it was. The pale lace, unmistakable, lying in plain sight that my cheeks burned. I reached for it quickly, but his hand moved first, plucking it from the cushion. "You dropped something," he said, his tone lighter than the weight of the moment. He didn't hand it over right away. He just looked at it, then at me as if there were 100 things he could say, but wasn't. "It's just laundry," I muttered, taking it from him, but the air had changed thicker, charged out our conversation. Stumbled after that, lingering in pauses that felt too long. Every time his eyes met mine, I could feel that silent acknowledgement of what had just passed between us when he finally stood to leave. He paused at the doorway, leaning one shoulder against the frame. "You should be more careful," he said, his voice low, almost teasing. "Some things aren't meant to be left lying around." And then he was gone, leaving me with a racing heart, the faint scent of his cologne in the air, and the strange, undeniable feeling that the line I'd always been careful not to cross had just gotten dangerously thin. That night, I barely slept. It wasn't the memory of Ryan holding my underwear that kept me awake. It was the look in his eyes when he did. Like he was in on some secret I didn't even know I had. Over the next few days, I tried to push the whole thing out of my mind. I busied myself with work, calls to Daniel, and house chores. But Ryan had a way of lingering, even when he wasn't there. The more I tried not to think about him, the more he found his way into my thoughts. On Thursday afternoon, I heard the sound of footsteps on the porch. I opened the door to find him again, this time holding a bag of groceries. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, smiling. "Thought you could use these." "You always say Daniel never remembers to bring home fresh fruit." It was such a small, thoughtful gesture, but it felt different, intimate. He didn't just bring groceries. He knew what I liked, what I complained about, what made me smile. We unpacked them together in the kitchen. The conversation was easy, almost domestic, and yet beneath it, there was that same current from Sunday. He noticed little things, how my hair fell in my face when I leaned over the counter, the way my hand brushed his when I reached for a peach dot at one point. He paused, looking at me like he was deciding whether or not to speak. "You've been on my mind," he said finally. I froze, my fingers tightening on the edge of the counter. "Ryan," I started, but my voice faltered. He smiled faintly, like he knew I wouldn't finish the sentence. "Don't worry. I'm not going to make things complicated," he said, though his tone made it clear things were already complicated. After that, we saw more of each other by accident at first, then not so much. He'd stop by to drop something off, or check on the boiler when Daniel was away. We'd have coffee in the kitchen, long conversations on the couch. And every time there was a little less space between us. It was during one of these visits, a rainy Saturday evening, that this unspoken line between us started to blur. We were sitting in the living room again, the storm tapping softly against the windows. I got up to fetch another blanket, and as I returned, my phone lit up with a text from Daniel, working late again. "Don't wait up." Ryan noticed, but didn't comment. Instead, he leaned back against the couch, his arm resting along the back cushion close. Enough that I could feel the warmth of his skin near my shoulder. We sat there in silence for a long moment, listening to the rain. Then, without turning his head, he said softly, "You deserve more than someone who's always gone." It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. And hearing it said aloud sent a ripple through me. When I looked at him, he was already watching me, his expression unreadable, but his eyes too honest to ignore. That was the first night he didn't leave right away. The rain kept falling, and the air between us grew heavier. We kept talking, but the conversation had shifted less about groceries, work, or neighbors, and more about the things we weren't supposed to share. Ryan told me about his last relationship, how it had ended because she said he was too intense. He laughed as he said it, but there was no humor in his eyes. I told him how Daniel used to be spontaneous when we first got married, how he once woke me at 2 a.m. just to drive to the coast and watch the sunrise, and how those things didn't happen anymore. It felt wrong to talk to him like this, but it also felt good. Like he actually saw me. By the time he finally stood to leave, it was past midnight. He paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. "Good night, Claire," he said, and there was something about the way he said my name, soft, deliberate, that followed me to bed. The days after blurred into a series of chance encounters that didn't feel so accidental. He'd show up with a ladder to fix a gutter Daniel had been ignoring. I'd find a coffee cup on my porch in the morning with a note. "Tucked inside. Thought you might need this today." Once. He forgot his jacket at my house and came back the next evening to retrieve it, staying an hour longer than necessary. Every time he was near me, the awareness of him was sharp, like my senses had been rewired just for him. One Tuesday, when Daniel was out of town for a conference, Ryan stopped by to check on the leaky faucet in the kitchen. I was in the living room folding laundry when I realized, with a jolt, my underwear was still draped over the arm of the couch from the morning wash. I froze, debating whether to hide it, but before I could move, he appeared in the doorway. His eyes flickered to it, then to me. "You left something out," he said, his voice low, not teasing, not judging. Heat rushed to my face. "I forgot," I murmured. He didn't step closer, but the way he was looking at me made the room feel smaller. "Some things," he said slowly, "are hard to forget." That moment sat between us like an open secret. After that, it was like neither of us could go back. We started talking every evening, even if it was just over the phone. Sometimes he'd tell me about his day. Sometimes we'd sit in silence and just listen to each other breathe. One Friday night, Daniel called to say his flight was delayed until the next afternoon. I don't know why I texted Ryan instead of telling him I'd see him another time. Maybe I wanted him to read between the lines. "He's not coming home tonight." There was no reply. 15 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. He stood there, in the dim porch light, rain dripping from his hair. "You should lock this door at night," he said, stepping inside. I thought I'd feel nervous, but instead I felt calm, like I'd been waiting for this without realizing it. We didn't rush anything. We talked for hours in the living room, the same place this whole thing had started. We kept leaning closer without meaning to, our knees touching, our voices dropping to whispers. At one point, I laughed at something he said, and his hand brushed mine on the couch cushion. Neither of us moved it away. That night didn't end with us crossing every line, but it ended with something even more dangerous, knowing that we would. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The house was quiet, sunlight spilling across the floor, but my mind wasn't on Daniel or the laundry or even the errands I had to run. It was on Ryan on the way his voice had dipped low when he'd said goodnight. The warmth in his eyes when he looked at me, the lingering touch on my hand. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself I was imagining the whole thing, but my body knew better. My chest felt lighter when my phone buzzed and his name appeared. Did you sleep? I stared at the message longer than necessary before replying. Not really. You? Seeing just that 3 short letters, but they felt like an invitation. Over the next week, the moments between us became an unspoken language. We didn't have to say we wanted to see each other. Our days seemed to arrange themselves so that we did. If I was walking to the corner store, he'd be there by chance, leaning against his truck. If I was gardening, he'd appear with a glass of cold lemonade. It was harmless on the surface. Neighbors talking, sharing the occasional coffee. But underneath, every word carried weight, every glance stretched too long. One evening, I was making dinner when my phone buzzed again. Your lights out on the porch. Want me to fix it? Daniel was working late. Sure, I typed back, and before I could even put my phone down, there was a knock. The bulb was in his hand. Figured I'd just bring one over, he said. It didn't take him long to replace it, but when he was done, he didn't leave. Instead, he stepped inside, his shoes leaving faint marks on the tile. You smell like cinnamon, he said quietly, glancing toward the kitchen. Baking? I nodded, suddenly aware of how close he was standing. Cinnamon bread, Daniel likes it. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Lucky man. The air between us shifted again, and my heart beat so loud I was sure he could hear it. That night, we didn't sit across the couch like before. We sat side by side, our shoulders brushing, both of us leaning in as though pulled by gravity. At one point, his hand moved toward mine on the cushion, stopping just short of touching. If I asked you something, he said softly, would you tell me the truth? My throat was dry. Yes. Do you want me here? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at him, really looked the faint scar above his eyebrow, the curve of his mouth, the way his chest rose and fell. Yes, I whispered. And not single word changed everything. The days after blurred into stolen moments, quick touches, whispered conversations no one else could hear, a slow unraveling of the careful lines I'd drawn for myself, and still nothing had gone too far. Not yet. But it was coming, and we both knew it. The next few days were like walking a tightrope over something dangerous. Every time Ryan and I crossed paths, I felt the line between neighbor and something else fray a little more. It wasn't just the glances anymore. It was the way he lingered when handing me something, fingers grazing mine. The way his voice softened when we were alone. The way he sometimes looked at me as if memorizing my face, like he might need it later. I told myself I had control. That as long as I didn't cross the final line, I was safe. But the truth? I was already falling. One Thursday evening, the rain started early. I'd left the laundry on the porch, and before I could go get it, there was a knock. Ryan stood there, damp from the drizzle, holding the basket. His shirt clung to him, his hair slightly mussed, eyes bright. Didn't want it all to get soaked, he said, stepping inside. I reached for the basket, but he didn't let go right away. His fingers brushed mine and something in his gaze. Locked me in place, you okay? He asked. The words were simple, but the way he said them made my heart ache. No one had asked me that in a long time. Not like they really meant it, I swallowed. Yeah, just tired. Tired of what? Everything. Nothing. The space between us. The ache in my chest. The way my marriage had quietly become a routine rather than a connection. But I didn't say any of that. I just shook my head later. As he turned to leave, he glanced back. You know you can tell me things, right? I nodded, though I wasn't sure if that was a promise or a warning to myself. The next night, Daniel called to say he'd be staying late again. I sat in the quiet kitchen, half listening to the rain on the roof. My phone buzzed. Want company? The sensible answer was no. The answer I gave was yes. Ryan didn't knock this time. He opened the door quietly, stepped inside, and took off his seat. jacket like he belonged there. We didn't turn on the lights, just the warm glow from the lamp in the corner. We sat on the couch, closer than before. The conversation started light about music, about the rain, about the fact that the cinnamon bread I baked last week had apparently ruined store-bought bread for him forever. But at some point, the space between our words got smaller. The silences got heavier. You ever feel like you're living in a life you didn't exactly choose? He asked suddenly. My chest tightened. Every day. His hand was on the back of the couch, so close to my shoulder that I could feel the heat of it. You deserve better, he said quietly. You deserve someone who looks at you like what? I whispered. His eyes held mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The rain outside seemed to fade. Like you're the only thing in the room worth seeing. He finished. That was the first night I realized there was no going back. We didn't kiss, not yet. But when he left, my hand lingered on the doorknob, wishing I kept him there. 2 nights later, Daniel texted that he wouldn't be home until morning. I stared at my phone for a long time before setting it down. The house felt too quiet, too big, too full of the kind of loneliness that crept under your skin. Almost without thinking, I sent a message. You up? A reply came fast. Be there in 10. When Ryan walked in, there was no pretense this time. No basket of laundry, no excuse about the rain. Just him tall, sure, eyes dark in the low light. We stood there in the living room, the silence between us humming like a live wire. My forgotten underwear from earlier in the week still sat on the arm of the couch, folded from when he'd found it. He glanced at it, then at me, and something unspoken passed between us. Are you sure? He asked, voice low. Yes. That... One word seemed to break whatever careful restraint we'd been holding. He stepped closer, his hands brushing my arms, his touch warm and certain. When his lips finally found mine, it wasn't tentative, it was deep, consuming, like all the moments we'd been avoiding had poured into this one. The world outside might as well have vanished. All I could feel was the weight of his body against mine, the way his fingers threaded into my hair, the way he kissed me like he'd been starving for it. We didn't rush. We explored. We learned each other like a song we'd been humming for weeks without knowing the words. Every touch was deliberate. Every look heavy with the knowledge that we were crossing a line we could never uncross. And yet, in that moment, it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. Afterward, we lay tangled together, the soft rise and fall of our breathing filling the quiet. He brushed a strand of hair from my face and looked at me like he had that night on the couch, like I was the only thing worth seeing. You know, this changes everything, he said. I nodded, my heart pounding, because I knew it was true. But as his arm tightened around me and the rain began again outside, I realized I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt seen, wanted, alive, and I wasn't going back.